Okay, really good morning, everybody. Welcome to this second in our series of 6 webinars for our 25th anniversary year for Resilient Leaders Elements. We're using the opportunity to reflect back over the last 25 years of supporting people to be resilient leaders and taking the opportunity to learn from 25 years so that we can cast forward and take that learning with us to deal with the uncertainty of the next 25 years. It's a really, I think, a very pertinent time to do this, and I am really excited and delighted to be able to welcome Sir Terry Waite to join just me this morning and have a conversation. We've asked people, Terry, for questions that they'd like to put to you with that theme in mind, and our theme for today is leading in isolation. So what I thought I'd do, Terry, is if I give an introduction to you that will sort of really position why I've asked you to come and talk to us today about with that theme in mind. So, Terry, you're a British humanitarian activist and author, a son of a policeman, and had a close affiliation to the Church of England for most of your life and career. And that has included being an advisor to the first African Archbishop during the reign of Idi Amin, worked in Rome as consultant to various committees, Archbishop of Canterbury and envoy to the Middle East. And at that was the time that you were taken hostage when you were trying to help those who were already in captivity. You spent 1,763 days exactly in captivity. It's almost 4 years of that time was in solitary confinement. And all of that happened before 1991, which when I was thinking about that, it's a long time. So since that time, you're co-founder, president of YCare, which is the YMCA's International Development and Relief Agency. You founded Hostage UK, a charity designed to give support to hostage families. President of Emmaus UK, charity for formerly homeless people. Patron of Storybook Dads, where prisoners can record themselves talking, reading stories for their people, for their children, bedtime stories for 200,000 children affected by being children of imprisoned parents each year in the UK, and patron of Habitat for Humanity, the Romany Society, and the Strode Park Foundation in Kent. So I'm not sure there's a better person to help us think about resilient leadership and leading in isolation. And that's an introduction to you, Terry. Have I missed anything that you'd like
No,
to?
I think that's more than enough.
Well, you're hugely welcome. And as I've said, we've asked people for questions before this, so everybody can just sit and relax and listen. And we'll stay on the line online a little bit afterwards as well. So perhaps if there's any questions that come up as a result of listening to you, we'll collect them and perhaps put them to you afterwards as well.
Okay.
So I have 10 areas that I'd love to discuss with you, Terry. And the first is about today's kind of society with social media surrounding us and feeling very rarely alone. We have constant access to information and people often whenever we want. And in your book, Taken in Trust, you talked about solitude actually being a real gift and how it can help us perhaps at times of supreme uncertainty. And in fact, you said our fragmented society needs a whole series of reflective pools, places where the very deepest issues can be explored away from the cut and thrust of the marketplace. So I wanted to sort of start there really and just think about times where we're really very rarely alone to your extreme and traumatic experience of that. There was kind of learning that you've taken away from that experience to now. What would it be, would you say?
Well, to go back over the years and just to look at the situation in which I found myself, we can explain why if you ask that question later.
Mm.
But I was in an underground cell. Um, Sometimes it was above ground in a bombed out building, but always without natural light. Um, Shutters were put against the window if I was in a bombed out building, so no natural light came in. I was chained to the wall for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day. So I couldn't do any exercise other than the exercise you can do on the end of a chain. Um, I had no books or papers or anything to write with for almost 4 years. I had one visit to the bathroom a day, and the rest of the time I had to be in my cell. Um, I wasn't allowed to see anybody. I didn't actually see another human face for almost 5 years because when someone came into the room, I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes. So I had no sight of any human face, and certainly no conversation. I mean, there is an amusing story in all this, believe it or not. I mean, I said to my captors initially, this is in the early days, in the first 2 weeks, I said, does it not say in the Quran you mustn't steal? Oh, no, we mustn't steal. I said, how is it you steal me from my family? You've taken me away, you've kept me, you've deprived me of my liberty. They said, we'd better go and ask the chief about that. So they went away, and a couple of weeks they came back. And I said, well, what did the chief say? They said, the chief said, we mustn't talk to you anymore. So I got nowhere with that. But now to come more to your point, in that situation of extreme isolation, you obviously are worried about two things, really. You're worried about your physical health, and you're worried about your mental health. And also, you've got external concerns about family. How are they doing? Because I had, and still have, still married, of course, but I have a wife and 4 children, all of whom were coming up to university age. What I had to do was to try and live each day as fully as possible. To say, well, you still have life. And the great thing is to keep hope alive. Now, how is that done? It's done by just being thankful for what you've got. I was tortured, and I did face a mock execution in this whole process in the first year. But somehow I survived that and was always able to keep that glimmer of hope alive and always able to live as fully as possible, which is why you have to be able to develop your mental capacity. The great thing, I mean, we've put great emphasis these days on physical well-being, which is important. You know, gyms flourish, but it's equally as important to place emphasis on the inner person. Now, whether you call that the soul or whatever you might call it, it's immaterial. It's the inner person, the inner you, that needs to be nourished. And the question, of course, is how do you nourish that inner person to give you the resilience to face the problems and difficulties that are bound to occur as we go through life?
Thank you, Terry. I have the next question is around self-care actually, and the need to kind of rest in order to get more energy to go again, to kind of recover so that you have enough energy to surge and go again. And there's a lot of talk and research around circadian rhythm, and I know that a lot of that was taken away from you. There were times where you didn't know whether it was night or day.
Yes, I didn't know. I had no knowledge of night or day
Yeah.
for a long time. But
Yeah.
then, you see, people often ask me also, how did you manage time? Because, you know, in the dark for much of the time. Well, the answer is with difficulty, because when you're in the dark constantly, you can't distinguish between night and day, and you do actually become very disorientated. Of that, there was no doubt. Now, fortunately, I was not in that situation for a great length of time. I was moved to a place where nearby there was a mosque. And of course, the mosque, as you know, 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the morning, midday, you have the call from the minaret. And that gave me a fixed point, which does say a couple of things that we need to be able to find the rhythm, find an effective rhythm, which is why, in particular, I think for older people, I mean, I'm an elderly person now. I'm 86 years of age, and the older I get, the more I recognize it's important to have that rhythm for the day, that pattern for the day. Now, with modern life, that can be very difficult, particularly if you're doing a job that requires a lot of movement, a lot of adaptation, and sometimes requires very early start and getting home very late at night. Is it any wonder that people are stressed? Which comes back to the point of management. I mean, I feel that much of management these days is inadequate. It isn't a matter of just sticking to the rule book. It's a matter of taking a personal interest in the individual or the individuals for whom you have a responsibility, to recognize that they are unique, they have their own problems, their own difficulties, and that somehow part of your job is to help them manage in a situation of work so that they become as productive as possible, and yet at the same time, not to put undue strain on them or lack of understanding about their domestic circumstances and their other circumstances. In other words, a personal interest. And how often do I hear it said that management, yes, very good at telling you to follow the rules, but no understanding of my personal situation, no understanding of what I'm facing.
Yeah.
Right. Some people do not want to have their personal details disclosed. But at the same time, you can still have, as a manager, that sympathetic and symbiotic understanding of those with whom you're working and show that in your behavior and in your management style.
Yeah. We have one of the elements of resilient leadership that we ask people to think about is awareness. That's a
Yes. Yes. I didn't quite catch your comment there.
Oh, I think we've got a couple
I'm sorry, you're frozen there. Sorry.
We've got a couple of technical issues there with Rachel. Just start back in again. Thank you, Terry. Hopefully she'll be back on shortly. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel.
Sorry about that, Terry. Crashed out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, management intervened there.
Yeah, there we go. Give me a chance to think about what you just said, if nothing else. But one of the things, what I was talking to myself about at that point was that we talk about awareness, having a heightened level of awareness as a resilient leader, somebody who's able not just to think about what you do, but who you are.
Exactly.
And what takes you from pressure, which is healthy, keeps you alive and motivated, to stress, which if we stay there for too long is debilitating. And knowing that about, and then understanding what helps you rebalance, right?
Yeah, and earlier you asked a little bit about solitude. Just let me fill that out a little bit.
Please.
If you've got a busy life, as most people have, with domestic responsibilities and work responsibilities, it's very, very difficult to get time alone. Very, very hard indeed, particularly when you've got a growing family. But I do think it is essential that there are reflective points in life where you can stop and you can simply be quiet and look at yourself. Now, one of the great benefits of my captivity, and there were benefits, certainly I wouldn't wish to go back through an experience of that I passed through. I wouldn't wish to go back to it, but it wasn't all negative, because during that process, I was able to discover, if I may put it this way, the truth about myself.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so easy, and we all do it, to deceive ourselves, to think we are other than what we really are.
Mm.
The fact of the matter is that all of us are a complex mixture of what you might call good and evil, light and dark. We all make mistakes. We all do things for which we're ashamed. And sometimes, if those things are too great, they can overwhelm us and affect our behavior and our thinking and our whole relationships. But it's important, I think, to make a frank recognition of who you are, your good points and your negative points, and to be able to assess that. You, no one is going to be perfect, and no one would expect that. But where mistakes are made, you can at least recognize them and take some opportunity to correct them and not to make them in the future. And if you do make them in the future, as you probably will in some instances, well, be a little forgiving.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just don't be silly about it. You know, don't be over introspective. But in that period of time when I was in captivity, I did get this opportunity to look deep within and to discover myself and to discover how, in fact, you know, I could easily fool myself. I could easily be led astray, and easily fool myself that I was this, that, or the other when in fact I wasn't.
Mm.
So that period of time, I think, is important. I mean, some people will put that into a religious framework and use that as use the contemplative model in a religious framework, but it needn't necessarily be in a religious framework. It can be in a secular framework as well. You don't have to be religious to be reflective, to be honest, and to be sincere with yourself. If you have a religion, then the symbols and meaning of that religion, perhaps in a number of instances, can be an aid. But it isn't absolutely necessary. You can do it without religious belief.
So seeing solitude as an opportunity to self-reflect, a positive opportunity to still doing something, but it's
a very positive opportunity. But make no mistake about it. In today's world, it's difficult to find.
It's hard to.
I mean, one of the things I do find is extraordinarily difficult is the amount of noise in the world. A very noisy world, noisy advertisements on TV in such a way that your mind registers them, but at the same time almost blanks them out because it's noise, it's people shouting at you. Modern music, very noisy. Everything very, very noisy. Everything, in a sense, going against that quietness of inner reflection, going against it. And you have to fight against it. I mean, you may think I'm crazy, but I gave my TV away 2 years ago. I said, I've had enough, and it's gone. I actually now I'm selective on YouTube and what have you. I'm selective on the.
Well, you famously resisted TV when it was offered to you by your captors, didn't you?
Yes.
Unless they would let you watch the news, and you said,
Exactly.
"No, I'm not having it then."
Exactly.
You've just done it again, Terry.
I've done it again.
Okay. So I'm going to take you on because I know that in the early days, in your days of the Church Army, you worked with people like John Adair, and as an ex-army,
yeah, that's right.
as an
ex-army
officer, went to Sandhurst. John Adair and action-centered leadership was what we were trained on, and
right.
Yeah, so I have a question around those times when you worked with John Adair, and I know you also have a lot of experience of Jungian psychology and the shadow side and how that helped you as well when you were exploring getting to know yourself, sort of deep exploration. And one of the questions that I had from another Army officer was that the leadership development, because you also trained people, didn't you, in leadership development and training and management programs through your church work, I think.
Yes. Well, what happened was that First of all, just to clear things matter, I'm not a clergyman and never have been and never wanted to be, and I have no vocation in that direction. But I have worked from a church base for vast majority of my life, either as an educational consultant or what have you, and then finally as an advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury, advisor on his international relations and so on. But going back to John, dear old John Adair, I'm very interested to know that you know him. We worked together in the early days of training in T group training. You probably heard of training groups. You probably know all that field. And we were the pioneers of that work in this country. For those who are not accustomed to that form of training, it's a form of training whereby participants will meet in a group, an unstructured or largely unstructured group, in the presence of one or two individuals who are called trainers, who actually say very little. The group develops, and as the group develops and develops a life of its own, they're encouraged to be reflective both individually and collectively and learn from the experience. And some people can't bear it. I mean, we've had people just say, I can't take any more of this. I just can't bear it. And they've left. Perfectly at liberty so to do. It can be quite a tough form of training. But it is remarkably and produces remarkable insights for those who are willing to go through it. And I think I've lost touch with it now over the years, and I think it has changed a lot. And of course, it did become rather extreme in the United States and got into certain trouble where people were behaving in all sorts of ways, and sort of in some ways was a bit discredited at that point. But in essence, it's a very, very valuable form of training where it's conducted properly by leaders who know what they're doing and who can encourage people in personal growth and development, as well as understanding the dynamics of group development. I mean, a very, very comprehensive book on that, as I remember now going back, a book by Cartwright and Zander on you probably know it. Probably on group dynamics, and I've got a whole library of them which I haven't looked at for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think the spirit of the work that the leadership development that we did in those days was around the importance of the process. So relationships being critical to helping one lead. If you don't spend time when things are calm, building strong relationships that can withstand you needing to become more directive, then you could be in trouble when things become more urgent. So actually it does lead me to another question around what support you needed. I mean, you weren't able to get any, but actually we talk about know before you go into difficult situations the kind of support you need to help you be at your best. If you have any thoughts about
I think in my situation, I mean, I went into many hostage situations. I mean, the first one, going back over the years, was actually with General Amin. I mean, when some of my colleagues were captured by him, and I negotiated with him for the release and was able so to do. And then subsequently, I was in Iran negotiating with Hezbollah, with Revolutionary Guards, and then with Gaddafi, meeting Gaddafi face to face in his tent in Libya, and eventually when I was captured. I mean, one of the points to make about that is that if you do the work of hostage negotiation, you've got to face the fact that it's a highly dangerous occupation and you might be killed or captured. Well, I was young enough and foolish enough to say, well, okay, put that to one side, just let me get on with it. And of course was successful, but I always had in the back of my mind the knowledge that things could go wrong. And of course they did. in Beirut when I was captured. And I suppose that's true in everyday life. You know that things can go wrong. There's little you can do if you've decided on that course of action, the course of action you're going to take. I mean, this is how life is. But you have to be able to have the inner resilience to face what negatives may come as a result of your involvement. And it's that question of inner resilience, building it up, because you never know when you may need to call on it. And the other thing to say about that is, many people do not realize, I mean, let me put it another way. People have said to me, I could never cope with what you coped with. I could never cope with 5 years in isolation. And my answer to that is, you don't know until you've actually been into that situation, because you probably have within you more resilience to draw on than you recognize. And that is a fact. Now, if you've had, for instance, a history of mental disturbance, say, for example, or a long medical history of other kinds, that will, of course, weigh against you. But generally speaking, for the majority, you've got resources that you didn't know you had. And these resources you can call on if you've trained yourself or been trained and equipped to call on these resources at a time of need. And that's the importance of training and equipping for leadership and for that whole responsibility that comes with leadership.
What would you say is with you now still as a result of all of your experience? What do you call on still now, Terry, to help you when you're facing adversity? And we had a brief talk about the current climate, when you're feeling uncertain or stressed at the moment.
I don't know. I mean, I imagine that people listening to this are of a younger age bracket than myself. But just to say to those people, one day, hopefully, you're going to get old. And when you do, you will discover that your anxiety level increases. Your anxiety level increases because little things in the past that didn't bother you so much will bother you now. How on earth, for example, do I understand this letter I've got about car parking charges or whatever? And what procedures do I have to go through? And for goodness sake, what is going on regarding my council tax and so on? It comes at you from all directions. And if you're by yourself having to cope with this, and also you're not necessarily 100% computer literate, anxiety levels rise. Well, it's natural, and that will happen. But even so, when you're younger, when you're in new situations, you can face anxiety. When you do face anxiety, I think the part of the answer to that is to stand back and, if possible, have a trusted confidant, somebody whom you can trust and talk with. Now, that may be possible in many cases. It may not be possible in other cases. But for me, it's been absolutely invaluable. Now, again, this may sound strange, but you can't always have that in a married relationship. And for the reason being that in a married relationship, you can find you're putting too much responsibility, if you like, and pressure on your partner, who've got enough pressures alone without having to face yours. You can share so much. But if you've got a confidant away from that relationship, whom you can trust absolutely and share with, that can be extremely valuable. And it can be extremely valuable in helping you through the most difficult of situations.
Brilliant. Thank you, Terry. I wanted to go to how you reframed. I noticed when I was reading, I was really struck by the reframing you did. Would call it reframing. So the way you dealt with setbacks by seeing disappointment, knowing that it only leads me down a road to despair, is what you said.
Why Trump is hitting China hardest on trade.
Sorry.
And what might happen next.
Something's coming through on my phone. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Can
That's
you
okay,
rephrase
no
that?
problem. So it was kind of dealing with setbacks. Not that that was a setback, but dwelling on disappointment only leads me down the road to despair. And you had a disappointment, you reframed it and reminded yourself that this would only lead to despair. Another one was how I was kind of struck by the response to your captors in the moment as well. And you attempted to have one response, but in the moment you chose to have another. So the kind of reframing things, changing the way you view things that you could see as negative. I just wondered if you had any reflections on that.
Yeah, my reflections on that are yes. First of all, um, this is true with my captors, and it's true with others with whom I've negotiated. Some of the people I've negotiated with have been responsible for the most dreadful crimes and committed the most terrible atrocities. Of that, there is no doubt. But in negotiating with them, and they're not all like that, by no means would I say, not all hostage takers are put into that mold. Some have done the most terrible things, others have been drawn into the organization for a variety of different reasons. But I think what you have to do for the moment is put that into the background and try and put yourself in the shoes of the person with whom you're talking. Mm. Now, if I could just do that for a moment, let us say with my young captives or captors in Beirut, they were young men. They had been brought up for the whole of their life in a situation of warfare. They have been brought up to see nothing but warfare. Their economic situation, they were the bottom of the pile. They were the bottom of the pile often educationally. They were bottom of the pile religiously. They didn't occupy a prime place in the religious hierarchy. They were the lowest, if you like. So what happens? Along comes a charismatic individual and says to them, look, you join our group, our terrorist group, I wouldn't call it that, but you join our group, our freedom fighters, and you'll be able to find a new life, new liberty, and gain liberty for us all. So they join in, they get in. And before they know where they are, they're captured in this organization. There's no way out. I give you an example. When I was in captivity, one of the food became very bad, and John McCarthy and Brian Keenan were two other captives, were getting this bad food, and they complained about it. And eventually, the head man came to see them, and he said, "Well, what is it you're getting?" They told him. So he looked into it. He wasn't without honor. He looked into it and discovered that the young guard who'd been drawn into the organization had accepted the money for the food, pocketed half, and spent the other half on food. So we're only getting half rations. So they took this guard out and they shot him. They killed him. That which just gives an indication. Once they were in, they were in. There was no way out.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, one has to try and put yourself in the situation of these people and say, if I'd been brought up in this country, if I'd been brought up in a similar situation, would I find myself in their position? Not that their position is a good position, but would I find myself there? I'm trying to understand that. So it boils down to this, basically, in everyday life. Try and understand from where the other person is coming, what their background is, what their motives are, what their constraints are. Try and have that knowledge of them if you're going to be a successful leader and a successful negotiator. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, I think it's such a useful thought, isn't it? If we find ourselves isolated because of the poor behaviour of other people, rather than becoming a victim to that, doing our best to understand what's going on for the other person, to see how that helps free us from.
Well, I honestly, I don't think I'm being too smart here, but some of the stories I hear these days about the way management conducts itself are appalling. So many managers just do not seem to have that degree of empathy which is required, and that's an important word. It doesn't mean you have to be soft and sympathetic. It does mean you have to be empathetic. You have to try and understand. There's a difference between, and sympathy is to feel sorry for. Empathy is to understand, and understand in part in your own behavior what it is to go through X, Y, or Z. And that's a quality, I think, that a good manager will have. A good manager will be empathetic. I mean, I think back to, I've done quite a lot of work with the prison service, and over the years in different prisons all over the country, and I've done many sessions with prison officers, and I think of one prison officer. I'll name him. His name's Bob Gibson. He's now retired. Bob was at a big prison. Bob was a ordinary prison officer for 30, 40 years, and he retired. He dealt with the most violent people, the violent criminals. And Bob said to me, in all my years as a prison officer, I've never once had to draw my baton or use violence. I said, I've had some of the most violent criminals. What I've done is sat down with them, talked to them, and more than anything else, listen to them, listen to what they're saying. Now, of course, if you work with prisoners, some prisoners are going to try and pull the wool over your eyes. They're not going to give you the full truth. You can't be naive, but at the same time, you can be empathetic. And empathy doesn't mean naivety. It means wisdom of understanding. And Bob was such a person. And people today still say, oh, we look back to Bob Gibson and say, what a marvelous chap he was. And he was indeed, and still is. He's alive now. He's retired, of course.
Brilliant. And then I wanted to ask about courage and hope, something about courage and hope. And I'll circle back to a seemingly small point, Terry, that I read that you wrote around the joy that when you were given a book. And I'm thinking specifically here about how we build time in for breaks and things that give us courage, things that give us hope. And you said that the joy you got when you were given the book that you'd never read, which was the first circle, I think, that you'd never read before, and it enabled me to leave my own life. Just a book, a candle, and my imagination took me outside of myself for a while. And I was just thinking about the importance of finding things that give us a break.
Yeah, well,
we already talked about that, courage and hope.
I'm glad you raised that, because I'm seriously concerned these days about the way in which the arts are being treated. They're being, played down in the school curricula. And I have a granddaughter who wanted to, who was very, very good, and she wanted to do dance. There's no future in dance. She went to the Lehman School of Dance. She graduated with first-class honors in dance. But there was no future in it, really, unless you're going into ballet. And she's not a ballet dancer, she's a modern dancer. I mean, she did another degree and is now working in the university. But that's a different matter. But her parents had enough common sense to say, do what you feel you want to do. Don't be pressured into doing something just because you feel it's going to provide you with a pension at the end of it. Do what you feel is right. Your intuition tells you to do. She did that. But I'm gravely concerned about the way in which the arts are being played down. And I'll give you an example of how they came to help me. First of all, you mentioned the book or books. that enabled me to take myself out of myself and put myself in another situation. But I think of one thing in particular, and that is music. I had no radio and no access to any music for almost the whole of the time, almost 5 years. At the end of captivity, they brought me a small radio, a little $10 radio. And I tuned into it, and it was the first night of the proms. And they were playing the music of Elgar, The Dream of Gerontius. Now, personally, I find the words to that a bit over the top, a bit too religious for me. But I found the music, and particularly the music of Elgar, is so evocative. It reminded me, and still reminds me, of my home country, my land to which I'm intimately related. And I was taken out of myself by music. The arts there, music, literature, drama, they're all vitally important. If I could recommend anybody to read more about this, I would say get hold of the writings or listen to the lectures given by Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you've come across Ian McGilchrist. He's wrote, in fact, I've got his book, one of his books on my desk here now. I'll show it to you. The Meaning of Things. It's a big volume. This is just volume 1. He's got 2 volumes. Pretty expensive, I have to tell you. But, I mean, he speaks in that book about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. How the left side is the area of calculation, the right side is the area of imagination, and how the left side is being developed often at the expense of the right side, which is the side for the arts. And of course, modern life pushes us on the left side, calculation, computerization, etc., etc., etc. We need to have inner balance between left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And McGilchrist makes this point very powerfully in his 2 volumes. Well worth getting hold of. Hard work to read. I mean, they're big books, and he has written smaller books, but he's on the YouTube too. You can get him on there. So I would just say, if you can find time, to explore the arts a little more. The other thing I would say about that is just one further thing that comes to mind. I've never particularly liked poetry. From school I thought, oh God, poetry. But then when I was in captivity, I found I was beginning to write poetry in my head. And I wrote poem after poem after poem. And I wondered, why is it I'm doing that? What is it? Because I've never done this before. And I realized at the time it was possibly because the harmony of language was important to me to help me with creating harmony within. That it was and subsequently I've published a book of poetry called Out of the Silence, when I've recollected some of those poems and published them. They're not great poems, but they meant a lot to me. They meant a lot to me. This inner harmony of language, and that's what we also in our endeavors in life, I think, need to be working towards. And there are 3 things I would say, which are pretty reasonable precepts for living. First of all, try to work for harmony within yourself. Secondly, try to work for harmony with your neighbor. Now, let me explain harmony. Harmony does not mean total agreement. Harmony is a mixture of chords and discords. I mean, it's got different shades to it. But try and work for harmony within, harmony with your neighbor, and harmony with your environment. Because we are, whether we like it or not, we are a living organism, part of the total environment. you know, so take care of it. Actually, I am of the nature, I feel actually physically disturbed when I see us wrecking the natural environment because we're damaging ourselves. That needs protecting. It needs developing, and where we wreck it, simply in the cause of greater profitability, it's a long-term mistake. And what is happening now, if I may just briefly, I don't want to go into this in any detail, refer to some of the attitudes that I see expressed in the United States. They are absolutely contra to what I believe. Certainly put your economics in order, but my word, what a way to do it.
At the expense of the harmony that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Harmony. Harmony, a mixture of light and dark, a mixture of all shades, a mixture of all tones, but which gives you that harmony, that balance. And that is surely what we should be looking for.
It speaks to I wrote down here, Terry, I believe good language, like good music, has the capacity to breathe harmony into the soul.
That's right. That's something I said. Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. And I was really struck by your response, choosing in the moment. You said, I mutter thank you and conceal my real feelings. And I was sort of thinking again about how do we deal with people and situations that aren't good, and not have that increase our feelings of isolation, but actually thinking about I need to balance for myself. If I can't get a great relationship here, I'll do my best to find harmony, discord in a positive way, but actually I'll find other positive relations, trusted.
Yeah, you can't find harmony with everybody. And there are some people with whom you frankly got to admit you will never get on with. You tolerate. But it's one thing to tolerate and one thing to be polite in toleration, another thing to reject absolutely. Now, I think you're frozen.
Yeah.
I'm
Rachel. Brilliant. She's back. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Probably everybody's gone to sleep now.
Oh gosh, I hope not. We have no way of knowing. I can't see anybody, so we're just going to keep talking, Terry.
Okay, we're coming up to the end now, I guess.
We are. I've just got a couple of other final questions. There was something about staying determined, keeping on going, and the use of discipline. My first boss, a chap called Ray LeVar, used to say to me, tidy desk, Rachel, tidy mind. And I'm looking around me now and I've kind of got that happening here. You talked about the importance of regular patterns. You've already mentioned exercising daily, even when you physically were restrained, and the repetition of words and how that can help us in difficult times, and lead in uncertainty. And you said as well, my experience told me to never give up. What I'm wondering is, what advice would you give people who are struggling with a determination? Perhaps there's too many distractions, or they're feeling like they want to stop something that feels important to them. What would you say?
Well, I think if someone has got to that position, who feels that life is totally beyond them now, it's getting too much for them, I think there you need just to stop for a moment and go back to what I said earlier. If you've got a person to talk with, to explain how you feel, it can be very, very valuable. Some problems you just cannot resolve totally by yourself. You just can't do it. And sometimes you need the aid and support of another to enable you to have the insight into what is happening, what is taking place. Now, it's not easy to find such a person or such persons, but they are around. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that everybody needs to go and see a psychologist. I'm not suggesting that. I mean, some people do, some people need that, but that's not the general case. But it is a good plan if you've got somebody outside your normal relationships with whom you can share in total confidence and trust. That is a great help. I mean, people come to see me regularly, people who've been bereaved and are struggling with with bereavement. Now, I don't see them at any other time except they come to the house, we sit and talk for an hour, and they go away again. And they do it over a period of, some people do it over a period of 12 months, and then that's it. That's fine. I try and make myself available for that. So that is part of my answer, I think, to your question.
I think I might put it in two halves. So there was the thing around routines and discipline as well, Terry. Any kind of thoughts on that? Things that you still do today that maybe help you?
In discipline of thought, or discipline of...
Could be, yeah, kind of daily routines. I've just put a heading of kind of discipline. Just really struck me, the kind of regular patterns that you had. You had routines to your day that seemed to help you get
it's still not particularly easy for me to find regular patterns today. I mean, I do have a pattern, but then, one's subject to all sorts of different engagements. I mean, I'm off very shortly to Guernsey, where I'm president of the International Book Festival, so I go over there, and then I've got a podcast here and a podcast there. But what I've had to do as I've got older is learn to space things more, rather than, if I've had a busy day, the next day I know I've got to be free. I've got to be clear. I can't take 2 full days now on the job. That's simply because I'm getting older. At one time, I'd have thought nothing of it. So you measure yourself according to your physical and mental capacity, and face the fact, as you get older, your physical and mental capacity will not be as it was when you're 30. So when you're 30, make the best of it. Enjoy it, and
for
live
those
life
that are
as fully as
listening,
possible.
yeah, and for those that are listening that are a lot younger than me and you, Terry, that it's the importance of still building in space, time,
building in space, exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to read from the last chapter of the last paragraph of your book for the final question, which is, you said, one last word: suffering is terrible, it's painful and can leave lasting scars. However, it need not destroy. In many cases, it's possible for something creative to emerge from the very depths. I would not wish to go through it again, what has been described in this book, but I'm not sorry that I did. I've learned a great deal, and hopefully will continue learning until my dying day. What would you say, again, in the context of leading in isolation, is the kind of learning that we really need to take forward, having had this discussion today? Terry, what would you...
Well, I think you're quoting there from my book, weren't you? Take It on Trust, which was written many, many years ago. Looking back on it, I would say to anybody listening to this, just recognize that I'm a pretty ordinary person. I've got the same thoughts, feelings, and hopes and desires as the vast majority of people. I've simply been through an unusual time, and I've been through that unusual time, and because I was able to draw on inner resources that I didn't know I had at the time, I've been able to survive and learn from them, not be defeated by them, and still relish life, even though in this modern age there are so many aspects of life that I disagree with and feel unhappy about, because often I feel we're often heading in the wrong direction. And in the face of, we all need to have economic and financial stability. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to have that now, because I've worked for it, but I've had that. But at the end of the day, that isn't the most important. What is most important is you have that inner stability, inner wholeness, and you're growing towards that greater wholeness within yourself, not just for yourself, because that's done in relationship to other people. Some people say to me, the world is in such a mess. What can we do? What can we do to make things better? And my response to that is, we're not politicians. We can't enter into the high-level political discussions, but we can act within our own area of influence. And where you have an area of influence, a positive word, an encouragement, a development can mean the world to other people. And gradually, if we all acted positively within our own area of influence, we'd see a change in the world and in ourselves. So I say, don't despair, keep hope alive, and, there's to the future.
Thank you so much, Terry. That's perfect timing. I think leaves us on the underpinning belief that many of the people I know are listening to this have, that everyone leads and every one of us can step up and kind of make a difference in our small ways. So thank you so much for all that wisdom, Terry. I'm going to stay on a little bit longer with you, but I'll wrap this up now for everybody listening, just to say that we have our next webinar is in the context of leading on the edge of crisis on the 11th of June. So these themes are really interesting, remembering again that we're looking back at the last 25 years, taking learning forward to help us with what's coming downstream in the next 25 years. If you'd like to follow up any questions from me to pass on again to Terry, please do that. If you've got any questions about the work that Resilient Leaders Elements does, then again, please follow up with us and get in touch. But again, thank you so much to Terry Waite for your time this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are. And thanks for your advice.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.